Good afternoon. We're here this afternoon to make an interview with Professor Cherif Bassiouni of DePaul's College of Law for the DePaul Emeritus Society. And we're going to try to cover a number of topics, most of them associated with your long relationship with this university. But before we get you to DePaul, I'd like to know a little bit about your educational, professional background before you came to Chicago.
Well, I studied law first at Dijon University in France because I had done my my high school education in a Jesuit institution in Cairo, Egypt. There's an interesting historical, what should I say, connection there, because when I joined the school, and I spent 8 years there, including 6 of them as a boarder, living the life of a seminarian, one of the extracurricular activities I was offered to join in was the St. Vincent de Paul Society. So little did I know as a 12-year-old that I was going to spend 45 years of my life in a Vincentian institution.
So academically you've come full circle, but stay with St. Vincent.
That's right. So I spent 4 years in the St. Vincent de Paul Society, which was basically ministering to the poor, and so we did the usual food drives and clothes drives and whatnot, and we went to visit the families. Anyway, I did a double high school baccalaureate, as it was called at the time, both French and Arabic, which was very rare. I think there were just 6 in the whole country who were able to do the two simultaneously, and I won a scholarship to go to law school in France. So I went to law school in France. It was the last year of a 3-year program. So I did 2 full years, did very well. My second year I participated in a national competition in which I won the 2nd national prize in it. And I was in the top 10 of my class in the 1st and 2nd year. Now there's a reason I'm saying that. During the summer of my 2nd year, before going to my last year, I went back to Egypt, and that was 1956. At that time,
Egypt is your home.
Egypt is my home. The war was impending. The French and the British were about to attack Egypt and had literally roped Israel into joining them to do so. I joined the armed forces. I was a 2nd lieutenant in the special forces, and I fought in the Battle of Suez at Port Said, where I was wounded. Dismissed because of my wounds, and returned to France, however, in January of '57, which meant that I had lost the whole first semester. Yeah. But precisely because I was in the top 10, the dean made an exception, allow me to register in class in order to do my 3rd year. When my visa came to be renewed as a student visa, the French refused to renew it because I had been in the army in Egypt, and it was
understandable.
So I got kicked out of France on April 27. I'll never forget the date. My final exams were the 1st week of June, so I could not graduate it, even though I was within the reach of it. So I went to Geneva, and I registered for the law degree there, but it was 4 years. So I had to do an extra year. And I did 1 semester, and then I went back to Egypt. And then my father preferred that I not leave again, so I went to law school at Cairo and took a law degree there. And then I left for the United States in '62. I was given 2 years credit at Indiana University, which that too is a sort of a cute story. I had a classmate who was doing his LLM at Harvard, and he invited me to join and do the LLM at Harvard. And I said, well, you know, I've immigrated to the US and I intend to stay here, so I want to have the basic law degree. And apparently it was quite difficult to get into the basic JD. I could have gotten into the LLM at Harvard without difficulty. And through a serendipitous set of circumstances, I met the dean at Indiana University while I was in New York shopping for law school. And he offered me a scholarship. So I found myself at Indiana University, and they gave me a full 1 year credit out of 3 years of law school. So 2 years later, I got my first American JD.
So you have a number of JD degrees and doctorate of law degrees.
Yeah.
Is DePaul then your first academic position after you graduated from all these law schools?
It is.
And you've been at DePaul
45 years.
1964.
1964.
You
Yeah.
came 1 year before I did.
Yeah.
And let me ask you, when you got to DePaul as a young man, as a new instructor in the law, what was your impression of law students at DePaul in your first years here?
Well, 64 was a sort of a turning point. If you remember, Father O'Malley had left the presidency of the university, and we had a new president. At the time, the executive vice president was Father Richardson, Father Richardson had been expected in '63 to become the president.
Yes,
but
heard that story.
There was a problem in that, you know, his brother was the superior general.
Yes.
And there was some talk about, you know, you can't really have the brother of the superior general, who was, by the way, very young at the time. So there was some opposition to him. So they brought in somebody who was a biology professor.
Father Corlew.
Father Corlew. And Father John Corlew was a wonderful human being. But he felt a little bit uncomfortable, at least at the beginning, being the president. He was not comfortable making public speeches. And for all practical purposes, Father Richardson was running the university, at least so it appeared to be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one thing I have to tell you, Al, that absolutely fascinated me and struck me was in my first week of teaching, the man who had recruited me by the name of Al Vail, God rest his soul, said, well, let's go down to lunch. And he took me to the faculty dining room that you remember.
On the fourth floor.
On the fourth floor next to the students' cafeteria. And we sat at a round table. And lo and behold, here comes the president, Father Corlew, and the executive vice president, and the chancellor. And they're all sitting at the table. And I'm looking at them, you know, I mean, this is my first week of teaching.
Had you met them before?
I had met them cursorily. But I'm sitting at the same dining room table with the president, the executive vice president, and the chancellor.
You know, I had the same experience a year later.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I looked around and I said, wow, this is an extraordinary place. And as weeks went by, and I had the habit of going there, and we met several times there, this was, to me, just a unique experience of being able to sit with colleagues, many of them senior colleagues from other branches of the university. I mean, I remember one day sitting there and listening to Dominic Crossan, who was such a distinguished theologian, speak about the latest book he wrote. We had so many other distinguished colleagues who did extraordinary things, and here we would sit around this round table and hear about what they were doing, and be part of it. And it gave me an enormous feeling of being part of the institution. And frankly, Al, this is why for 45 years, even though I had many offers, I never left DePaul.
I know, and I had some of those same experiences
I'm sure
as
you
well.
did, yeah.
What about the students in the beginning years?
The beginning years was, I have to say that I was extremely impressed with the students in the first few years of my teaching, and I have been totally disappointed in the students in the last few years of my teaching. Now, I suppose psychologists can say this is really a process of aging, that you know, you always sort of look at the past as having sort of something better or more to offer than the present. But let me try to describe that. At the time, the law school had 600 students. Now it has about 1,000. In the 600 student, we had almost 50-50 day and evening students. Mm-hmm. Among the evening students were people who were mostly older than I was. And they all had their jobs and their careers. They didn't really have much time to study, to read, but there was a certain amount of seriousness and dedication that was just extraordinary to watch. And what I think was more touching, in a sense, for me, was they didn't have the expectation that something was due to them. They knew that they had to do the work, whatever it was, even if it was minimal or maximum. They didn't have the expectation that just because they had been admitted to law school, or they came from an undergraduate college that had a big name, or they had a good LSAT score, that yes, that meant that they are entitled to graduate.
Did you always, I know your major area is international law and things associated with that, and we'll get to that, but in the beginning, did you teach those courses right from the beginning?
No. Actually, you know, the DePaul Law School was a very bread and butter school.
Yes.
People criticize it for it, but I have to say that it had its merits in that it gave a structure. I look at today's curriculum and the openness that's available, and the total contrast with a highly structured and a totally unstructured, as between the two, frankly, I would take the structured. The totally unstructured, I think, not only creates confusion, but loses a lot of the synergies that one can obtain by having a thought-out, planned, synergetic curriculum. In the first few days, first few years, that is 15 years, I taught criminal law, freshman criminal law. So as they came through the door, I had the benefit of greeting them. So it was like day one of their legal experience. And I taught 3 sections, so that was either 2 day and 1 evening, or 2 evening and 1 day.
Basically, you taught American criminal law.
I taught American criminal law.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 sections means 12 hours of teaching.
Sounds familiar.
It was pretty tough. Well, it's not like now, where people barely teach 6 hours, and most of them manage to teach only 3 hours a week. And in addition to the 12 hours, in those days, we had to give a midterm exam, grade the midterms exam. We had to take class attendance. People would sit at the same spot. We had a chart. We had to know people. There was an expectation that we would be at our offices from 9 to 5, except on days where we had evening classes. We were expected to have an open door policy to see the students. Today, most of my colleagues, at least in the last 10, 15 years, barely come for 2 days a week where their classes are scheduled. Our classes were scheduled between 3 and 4 times a week, so that there was a certainty that we would be there. Today, that's not the case. Everything has to facilitate the faculty member doing what they want to do.
Young people who are studying law today, and comment on this, tend to specialize earlier in their studies than they did when you came. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
You produced general lawyers.
We did. To give you an idea, for the first, let me see, from 64 to 69, to be precise, the students had 2.5 years out of 3 years of required courses. Only in the last semester did they have an option. They had basically 8 courses from which to choose 4, so it wasn't much of an option. In 69, by the way, I was extraordinarily fortunate in that I think I was the only professor in the history of the law school who was promoted to full professor at the end of my 5th year of teaching. And by then, I had published a major textbook on criminal law, changing the whole methodology of teaching criminal law from the case method, the English case method, to a more European doctrinal methodology approach.
Looking for theories?
Looking for a theory or a doctrine to start with, but then following a method as opposed to simply going from case to case without understanding whether it's the historical, sociological, political, or other factors that led to the evolution of a legal concept.
Okay.
And so in 69, I was asked for the first time to chair a faculty committee to revamp the curriculum. And we did, and we did 2 years of required, 1 year of elective. But in the electives, we narrowed the electives to what I call track electives, so that you could choose a track that specialized you in public law, private law, or let's say taxation, for example. And just a little vignette of history. In order to do so, we had to get rid of some courses. And in my absolute naivete, although after 6 years I should have known things differently, I looked at the curriculum and objectively found that the one course we could do away with in the 2nd year was called Philosophy of Law. Now, the only problem, that course was taught by one John T. Richardson. So the committee said, well, you want to go tell him that, you go ahead. So sure enough, Al, I went down. You remember the offices were on the 6th floor.
And they've moved around.
Yeah, but the 6th floor were the executive offices. And so I went down the 6th floor and told Father Richardson, I said, you know, we've decided to cut off your course, and we're moving it into an elective as opposed to a required course. So you know, he was very what should I say, net in his answer, like, all right, thank you, goodbye. And you know, I was out of the door.
I know that in universities, not only the law school, and I know that you have been active in the larger university community as well. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the kinds of activities and things that you accepted, either willingly or not so willingly, within the larger scope of the university?
Well, as you know, the university in those days, I would say from the 60s into well into the 70s, and some maybe to the mid-80s, was a much smaller and much more integrated institution. And there was really a tremendous emphasis on, I want to call it the family spirit of the university, for lack of a better term. You know, knowing your colleagues from other departments and eating lunch with them once a week, or visiting them, or you know, traveling the L with them. There was a lot of this type of interaction. And I think, again, going back to the weekly luncheons, and I'm sure you've seen that. I mean, many a time some of us would take the president or the chancellor or the vice president to task. Why did you make this decision? You know, and we know we'd express our disapproval or approval. So there was a sense of openness, transparency, and I want to say even accountability.
Long before the word openness came
That
into
long
the
before
lexicon.
it came, long
Right.
before it came. And you know, it translated into small things. You know, we would walk the corridor, and if we found a piece of paper, we'd pick it up. I mean, I have seen countless times Father O'Malley or Richardson come in walking the corridors at night and turning the lights off. It was that kind of an atmosphere. Well, I think that among the things that I was involved in from the beginning was the curriculum change. You recall at a
Yes.
certain point in the College of Liberal Arts, there was a desire to do what I would call a sort of a Hutchins University of Chicago curriculum change of the
Do you think that desire came initially from the top down, from men like Richardson and Corlew, or did it come from the bottom up, or both?
Well, first of all, Richardson was extremely supportive of it, but Martin Lowry was the one, you know, he was the dean of the School
Yes.
of Liberal Arts and Science. He was the one who was driving it. But we would have meetings of that committee every Thursday evening from 6 to 9. And different faculty members from the College of the Liberal Arts and Science would come and present their views. And I have to tell you, the faculty was very enthusiastic. You know, I mean, just as a vignette, I remember spending 3 hours on one of these evenings between two faculty members debating the difference between psychological social psychology and sociological social psychology. Where does it fit? Does it fit in psychology or in sociology? If you took a course in this, would it satisfy that? It was that type of animated debate. You know, the faculty was very much involved and very much desirous of bringing things. Liberal arts and science had a life of its own. You know, it was not the same as in commerce. You know, commerce was like law school. It was a professional school, mostly with part-time people. Many of the faculty members, both in commerce and law, practiced outside. They came to teach part-time. There weren't, at least in commerce, too many PhDs. So it had a different feeling. It was a more transient atmosphere.
That was one of the difficulties before you and I came. Yeah. That was one of the difficulties in the accreditation,
Yes.
the overuse of part-time people
Exactly.
who were not on
Yeah.
tenure track in the faculty.
Yeah. So, you know, that was one of the very significant experiences I had. I had several others, one of which was when Richardson asked me to draft general rules for the university on promotion and tenure, which, as you recall, at one time the university established a committee on tenure and promotion.
Right.
And the members were elected by the academic council. I had the privilege of serving for 5 years on that committee and 3 of them as chair. Fortunately, Dick Houck was the first chair I served under and had the opportunity to learn the ropes of it. And Susanna Epp was one of my colleagues on it. And it was a very, very thoughtful process, but also a very difficult one. 2 interesting cases. Dean of Liberal Arts comes in and wants the promotion of a mathematician who was Hungarian. And he brings in a piece of paper that's about this size with a theorem on it. None of us could understand what the numbers were. And he said, this will be published in the American Journal of Mathematical Studies. and we need to promote this man who had been stagnating for 10 years as an assistant professor, not to associate, but to full professor. And so we said, why? And he said, well, he has solved in 10 years' work a theorem posed by a mathematician of the University of Chicago that nobody could else solve. So, well, we could understand that. We relied on the editors of the American Journal of Mathematical Studies. But then came the dean of the School of Music, and he said, well, we need to promote this guy. He was an Englishman. The first one was of Hungarian origin, became very well-known mathematician. The other one had a double name and was an Englishman. He was a very sort of iconoclastic character. And apparently he had invented a certain way of recording percussion music. And that didn't convince us too much. So Dean Miller got very upset and went to the executive vice president to get us overruled. The executive vice president had to come and talk his way with us. And anyway, so it was these types of things. And then finally, I think my third most interesting involvement was to draft the university's rules for appeals for people who are terminated and what type of due process they would have.
I'd like to move this discussion on an area for which I know your great fame is built, and that's the study of international law and all of the activities. I took the liberty of looking you up on the internet before I got here, and it is full of your writings and your talks and your books on such topics as the history of the International Criminal Court, the Palestinian-Israeli War and its solution, the legal aspects of the Iraqi War, the legal and moral aspects of the wars in former Yugoslavia, terrorism and international law. I could go on. How did you first get in this large topic of international law? How did you first get interested involved in this?
I think my first interest was awakened as a law student, first in France and then in Switzerland. In Switzerland, my mentor then, who was dean of the law school, had been a great supporter of the Nuremberg tribunals and of creating an international criminal court, and was the president of an organization called the International Association of Penal Law, which is the oldest scholarly association in the world. And time has it that I succeeded him and became president of that organization many years later. So in the 50s, I was interested.
So before you came to DePaul.
Oh yeah. You know, I was a graduate law student 10 years after Nuremberg. Yeah, it was still something that was very much alive, and I was in Europe, and you know, the effects of the war, the Holocaust. This was something that people felt very deeply at that time.
How did you begin to involve these personal and professional interests into the law curriculum here?
Well, this was my biggest difficulty, frankly. When I came, international law was not taught, and let alone my specialty of international criminal law and human rights. And so I basically had to pay my dues with the dean of the law school by teaching 15 years of 3 sections a semester of criminal law, and doing all sorts of other things in order to get to the point where in my 10th year I was allowed to teach a course in international law, and in my 15th year I was allowed to teach a course in international criminal law. So it took a lot of what should I say, dues paying before I was able to do so.
But you've developed that program into a quite noteworthy one here at DePaul. And what have some of the students you've had in these courses and classes, what have they gone on to do in the area, or have they gone on to work in the area of international law and terrorism, the other areas of that you're interested in?
You know, I put them into three categories. One category, which is probably the largest category, is the category of the unknown. That is unknown in the sense of I don't know what impact the subject or I had on them and how they translated that impact into anything meaningful. But I'm not discounting that because many of them have gone on to important positions. One of them became chief of staff of a president and a cabinet member. Another one became chairman of the board of a major Fortune 500, actually two of them, but one of them of a major oil company. To what extent some of that may have influenced them or affected their thinking at a time when they were dealing with something completely different but of great significance is something I don't know. But I would hope that, you know, this is part of the, you know, the unknowns of education in general. You know, we plant the seeds and you look at the people and you say, well, hopefully when they have reached these positions of power or authority, they're able to do something with it. The second category are those who may have dedicated their lives for a short period of time, which I've seen quite frequently. People who would say, well, I'm going to do 2-3 years of sort of internship or fellowship or work in this or volunteer in this and then go back and make money or enjoy life. That's a much lesser number, but the fact that they have had the commitment to do so means that these values which are in them are not likely to be jettisoned in the course of their professional careers. And the third category, which is what you asked of, is who do you directly see going into certain positions? One of my former students became the deputy legal advisor of the United Nations and spent a good number of years there. Another one spent his entire career in the Department of State, Office of Legal Affairs. Two of them have spent a lifetime career in the Department of Justice, doing international work in the Department of Justice. At present, I have 3 former students working in the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, one in the Tribunal for Rwanda, 2 in the International Criminal Court, 3 are in the State Department as career diplomats. Now those are the ones.
That's the third category.
Yeah, those are the ones who are still also in contact with me.
Right.
So this is not based on a survey. I mean, these are the ones who have remained close and kept contact.
To what degree has DePaul supported your interest in this field of international law and studies of terrorism and I know your many travels for the United Nations and to various parts of the world?
Well, there was a period when the Security Council appointed me as the chairman of the Commission to investigate war crimes in the former Yugoslavia. Now, that was in 1992, and it was the first time since Nuremberg that the Security Council had nominated a body to investigate war crimes. This was very much in debate because of political considerations. England, led by Lord Owen and other European countries, wanted to solve the Yugoslavia problem by the usual old realpolitik approach of how do you slice the pie and make everybody happy and go home. And the other side was really led by Madeleine Albright, who convinced President Clinton that you know, there is a principle of justice that we cannot abandon. And so I was entrusted with chairing this commission. It was a daunting work, and this was during the time when the war was going on. And so I was really caught between those in the Security Council who wanted to have a peace settlement and those who wanted the justice outcome. So it was a tension between the pursuit of peace as a political settlement and the pursuit of justice.
May I ask you if you think it's got to be one or the other, or are the two reconcilable?
It doesn't. They're very reconcilable, and that's what I kept telling people. Frequently, if not more often than none, it's a question of timing. There is a time when you have political negotiations, political settlements, where you let the dust settle, when you stop the conflict, when you stop the war. You can put, justice on the shelf for a while until the right time comes about it. I don't think you need to compromise justice. And I also think that, when I'm speaking to somebody who has more experience than I am in historical matters, but, every conflict is sui generis. Every conflict has its own dynamics and characteristics. There is no justice model that can be said to be one shoe or one size fits all. You have to identify what the goals are here. If you want reconciliation, it's one thing. If you just want to put out a wall between the two opposing factions and let them do whatever they want on their side, it's another. Just to illustrate the dilemma, for years, the pursuit of so-called peace in the Middle East has been, let's have an agreement. And I've always held the position that this is not about signing a piece of paper. It has to be about reconciliation between the two people. The territories are too close. The strategic depths are too narrow. There's just too much dependence on one another. So if you think of peace in terms of reconciliation, then you don't think in terms of erecting walls. You think of, how do I establish a common road system, a common electric grid, sharing of water resources? How do I integrate the needs of the communities? How do I make one side understand the narrative of the other?
It's clear to me that I think you're talking about the Arab, Palestinian, Israeli situation. Do you think that's, I don't know, this may be off the topic for this, but do you think that's possibly one step in some solution or towards some solution? Is a greater people to people or person to person?
Absolutely.
I'm parallel with whatever may go on between
governments,
entities.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I think that where you see that people try to reach out to people, and sometimes very small symbolic things have huge consequences. If you see a doctor from one community going to the other, the same I've seen as between, say, a Serb and a Croat or a Bosniak. You see somebody who's in need of care and somebody from the other community going and showing that care. These little stories, these anecdotes, have a way of spreading out through the communities that are just extraordinary in their impact. Anyway, so when I had this enormous task, the UN didn't give me any resources. So I went to Father Richardson and I said, I need to get this work done. It's an enormous task. There's a war going on. I need to go and investigate there. Just to give you an idea of the proportions, we had at the time close to 200,000 people killed. We uncovered, that is our commission, 151 mass graves. We did the biggest rape investigation in history. I personally interviewed 223 women who were raped. We collected evidence on over 550 raped women, information about over 4,200 raped women. We documented the whole policy of ethnic cleansing. And so it was an enormous amount of work. And so I needed a place to have the database. And Father Richardson gave me the space in the O'Malley building. He gave me an entire floor. And I called the FBI, and the FBI came and devised the security system. And I recruited, over the 2 years that we were there, 141 law student and young law graduate to work in the database.
Mostly DePaul law
Mostly
students?
DePaul law students.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, I would say 80% of them were DePaul law students and DePaul law graduates.
And they did this work pro bono?
Pro bono. Pro bono. I had a few staff supervisors who were lawyers, who were also DePaul young graduates, that we paid because we didn't have enough money. But we had an operation that run 24/7.
Is that project completed now?
Oh yeah, it lasted from 92 to 94. I developed a database to enter all of the evidence that we had from the field.
Have you been involved in any of the trials in the international court that have come out of the experience in
Sure.
areas of former Yugoslavia?
Well, it was the work that I did in that produced the biggest report by the Security Council, which was 3,500 pages long as a summary, but it was backed by 79,000 pages of documents.
And that's what the lawyers who are prosecuting
Correct.
those
Are
cases
using.
are using.
Exactly.
I see.
So I turned this over to the Security Council. On that basis, the Security Council politically was forced to set up the tribunal because they couldn't turn their back on it. And
In other words, your work led to the creation
absolutely,
of the court.
yeah. That's pretty well established, you know. And
Well, as we finish this up, let's get back for a few minutes to, we've talked about some of these gentlemen before, but let me just throw names at you and impressions,
sure.
if you will. Father John Corlew, John Robert Corlew.
Well, Father John Corlew was a very affable, easygoing, good person. That this is the word I would choose. He always made one feel comfortable and at ease. Never sort of superior or arrogant. You know, he was. Yeah, I'm not a Catholic, so I can't use that analogy too much. But it's like, you know, it's like you expect your parish priest to be like.
Neither am I, so
Yes,
it's kind of typical DePaul here.
I know. Yeah,
Father John Richardson, you
John
mentioned him already.
Richardson is a man I had great admiration for. We had a period of time in which our relationship was very uneasy. First because of my experiment with the curriculum, but I was also pushing very hard for faculty rights. At the time, deans would hire and fire faculty members, promote them or not promote them.
Are you talking law school,
No,
or are you talking in general?
In general, at the university level, because he had chosen me to write the rules, and so when I wrote the rules, which he didn't like, we had a lot of disagreement, but I was more, if you will, due process oriented. And he wanted to see this progress gradually because the system never existed. And I was not thinking of the political difficulties of going to the deans and saying, well, you can't hire and fire as you please from now on, after they had been accustomed to doing that for years on end. But there was a little bit of difficulty there, but past those difficulties, he was a great supporter, and we had an excellent relationship, and we still do.
Father Minogue?
Father Minogue was extraordinarily supportive of my work. I could call him any day I wanted, and we didn't have a chance to go into it, but as you mentioned, I did a lot of assignments for the United Nations. I was co-chair of the committee that drafted the Torture Convention. I was the chair of the drafting committee for the International Criminal Court Statute, many other projects. And so, particularly when I created the International Human Rights Law Institute at DePaul, I needed the support at the beginning of Father Richardson and then Father Minogue. They were both very supportive. We founded the Institute. And the idea of the Institute, Al, was to take students and to train them into being human rights advocates, to train them into
That's still going on.
It is still going on.
You're still actively teaching somewhat.
I am President Emeritus as of last year. I am Professor Emeritus, but I'm still teaching. And by the will of the faculty, I'm still the chairman of the Faculty Oversight Committee of the Institute. The Institute, by the way, has obtained more grant money than any other branch of the university. In the last 25 years, we have obtained about $28 million of grants and contracts. We're presently operating contracts exceeding $10 million in Iraq.
Well, it sounds to me like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression I have is that you've had a intellectually and personally satisfying career at DePaul, and I suppose none of us can turn history back to where we were, but my guess is that if we could, you might want to come back here.
I would. I made a choice. As I said at the beginning, I felt that the institution had accepted me as a member of the family, and I exchanged that with my loyalty and my dedication. I had many opportunities, including the 10 top law schools in the country, which I turned down. I realized I could have done more or better at one of these bigger or better institutions, but I've never regretted my decision, and I'm still pretty happy. I sort of am sentimental a little bit to the older days that we spoke about, where there was a little more cohesion. We don't even have that at the faculty level, let alone at the university level. Yeah.
Many people would reflect on that, who have been here, like myself too. Well, I want to thank you so much for this hour. It's been very interesting.
Thank you.
And I hope we can do this again sometime.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bassiouni.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Albert Erlbacher, Professor Emeritus of History, who's made this recording with Professor Cherif Bassiouni of the College of Law of DePaul University on March 23rd, 2010. Thank you.